Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019. In this section we're going to start to look at scheduling. And as part of this we have a couple of fundamental things to do to our plan in readiness for actually coming up with a realistic schedule for the wedding. Now the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between manual scheduling and automatic scheduling. And as part of doing that, I just want to explain something about scheduling in Project 2019. If you want to take a plan such as this one that we have here and schedule it manually, there will be nothing to stop you. Now what I mean by scheduling it manually is that you choose exactly which task starts on which date and you check that you've got the time to do it, that the resources are available, that your constraints and deadlines are met, and so on. So you can pretty much handcraft the whole schedule. Now in some situations you may have projects where that's exactly what you decide to do. But with a large project with a lot of resources and many constraints, dependencies, etc., that would be a very, very large job. It would probably take you quite a lot of time to maintain that schedule, particularly if there's a lot of change involved. And particularly if, as the project starts, things start to, shall we say, not go according to plan. Largely speaking, one of the main reasons that people use Project 2019 is to automate the scheduling. Now, of course, there are many other reasons to use Project 2019, but the automatic side of scheduling is one of the most significant ones. And it's the one that we're going to be concentrating on quite a bit over the coming sections. So my fundamental assumption about the wedding plan, and indeed about the bathroom refit, is that we're going to auto-schedule them. Having said that, and as we're going to see with the wedding schedule, within an auto-scheduled project you may well decide to manually schedule some of the tasks. So for instance, in the wedding plan, we may well actually manually schedule the actual wedding date and fix it in time and not allow Project 2019 to change it. But the rest of the schedule, we may be quite happy for Project 2019 to auto-schedule. Now, one of the things that I haven't done yet and which I need to do now is to resolve the question of when the wedding day will actually be. And at the moment, of course, because wedding day or task 48 has no predecessors, it's almost the first task in the project, which clearly is not correct. I really need to show that the wedding day is going to happen when everything else is done. I know there will still be a honeymoon after the wedding date, but the honeymoon itself isn't actually in the schedule at the moment. We've only got the making the shortlist and selecting the destination and booking the honeymoon. We don't have the honeymoon itself. So in effect, the wedding day is going to be the last task. Now, one way of doing this would be to have other summary tasks such as catering, flowers, memories as predecessors of the wedding day. But often when you're starting to get into the scheduling of a project, you decide that one or more tasks or groups of tasks can be separated out into significant phases. And what I'm going to do here is to separate out the wedding day, and I think the rehearsal as well. And I think these are going to be considered the last phase of this project. And then what I can do is to say that this last phase has its predecessor, the preparation phase, the phase when all the work on deciding on the venue, booking, flowers, etc. is all done. So what I'm going to do is take tasks 47 and 48 that I have highlighted here and separate them out from the rest of the schedule and make them a separate phase. Now, one of the things you need to be careful of here, because I am going to do a cut and a paste, which is something I haven't talked about much so far, and that is where you have tasks such as these two, which are subtasks of, in this case, the wedding day summary task. In order to cut them and put them elsewhere, I need to stop them from being subtasks of a summary task. So having selected them, I'm going to outdent them using the schedule group on the task tab. And I'm going to click the outdent button. Now I get a warning, and you're going to see this quite a few times, these planning wizard warnings. And this one tells me that if I outdent these two, they will no longer be scheduled as part of the wedding day summary task. And in fact, they'll be rescheduled to start before the project's start date. Now, that sounds a little bit dangerous, but in fact, it's something that's going to happen from time to time, this sort of planning wizard warning. And what you can say with confidence in this case is that because I'm going to immediately reschedule those with a different set of rules, this particular planning wizard warning is not one to worry about, because although they will be given a very strange date, it will be only for a very short period of time until I change them again. So I'm going to click on OK. And my tasks have now been outdented. Now note that the scheduled tasks are now right back to actually before the beginning of the project, which is clearly not when the wedding day is going to be. But we're going to change that in a moment. So now I'm going to cut those. So now I'm going to select Cut. I'm going to place my cursor in a row just below the end of the schedule, and I'm going to click Paste. Now, once they've been pasted into place, they pick up the indentation, of course, of the task above them, task 49 in this case. Now, I don't want them as part of the honeymoon, so I'm going to select both tasks and I'm going to outdent them. I get that same warning again about their scheduling, and again I'm going to click OK to continue, and they're back to being scheduled far too early. Now let me go back up to the attire task. Select it and then do an insert task above that. And that is going to be my task, my summary task for the preparation phase. So let me change the task name. And we're going to say preparation phase. And then what I'm going to do is to select attire, which is now task 8, right down to task 50. And I'm going to indent those to make them part of the phase. And then for the wedding day task, which we have down here in task 53, its predecessor will be the whole of the preparation phase. So I'm going to put a 7 in the predecessor column. And I now have a wedding day on August the 20th, 2019. Now I know that's not right, but at least I've got a wedding day now, which is at the end of the wedding project. Generally speaking, if you're going to use phases in a project, it's a good idea to do that before you start scheduling, partly for the reason that I've just shown you, where it often makes it much easier to set up dependencies. Now I've got one or two other very small changes here. I'm going to change the name of task 44. It's currently called Wedding Day, and I'm going to change this to Wedding Venue. And one particularly useful thing to note is that wedding day is an individual task, and it has its predecessor as a whole phase. So you can really mix and match these dependencies. The next thing we need to do is check that our task types are correct. Very often when you're setting up a project, you will have thought carefully about task types. You'll have your defaults set appropriately, and you'll also want to make sure that any exceptions from the default are set up as well. While we've been setting up the wedding day project, my default has been set to fixed units, as you know. But let me just demonstrate to you now, and bearing in mind what we looked at in the preceding section, that in this particular project, fixed units is not a good choice. So let's go to the Select and Buy Rings task. And let's suppose that the bride and groom look at that task and it's a 4-week task. And they say, well, it's not going to be a full-time job for us to select and buy the wedding rings over that time. Let's say it's only going to take half of our available time. So let's go into Assign Resources. And we get the Assign Resources dialog box again. Obviously, these two are assigned to that task, but they're assigned 100%. And watch what happens when I reduce the bride's assignment to 50%. as you can see, the task becomes a 40-day task. The amount of work continues to be set at 320 hours. Now, of course, in this project, the bride and groom's time isn't chargeable, and we're working more on a notional idea of what proportion of their available time is being used on each task. So when we say the bride is 50% allocated, that's just half of the time that she's got available to work on the plans for the wedding. Now, clearly the idea is not here to extend that task, but just to reflect the fact that the bride's time on it is only going to be half of her available time. So what I'm going to do is close this, and I'm going to undo that last change. And what I really need to do here is to set the task type for this and effectively every other task in the project to be a fixed duration task. Now, if I want to change a fundamental property of a task, you've already seen I can use the task information dialog box. And I can also change a whole set of tasks by selecting multiple tasks just by holding down my control key and using the same approach. So what I'm going to do is select everything from attire. I'm going to go all the way down to task 50, hold down my shift key and click, and that will select everything between those two tasks. And then with the control key held down, I'm going to make other individual selections. So rehearsal, wedding day, and if I scroll back up to the top, hold down control and select those three as well. And I'm going to change each of those to be fixed duration. So if I click on information on the task tab and go to the advanced tab and make sure that I have fixed duration in the task type and not effort driven. Note that when you see just a black blob or a black square in a box, it means that you have a mixed type in there, so some are and some aren't. Now you need to be very careful when you transfer what you're looking at here to the bathroom refit project, because the bathroom refit project has a situation with task types that are a little bit different from what we have here in the wedding project. So let's click on OK, and that's all fine. Now let me go back to that wedding rings task. And once again, I'm going to right click and go to Assign Resources. And once again, I'm going to change it to 50%. And watch what happens this time. Look at the duration and also look at the work. Now what happens is the amount of work is reduced. The duration has not changed. The bride is shown at 50%. Now, if I reduce the groom to 50% as well, you'll see we're not changing the duration, but we are showing that each of the resources is only needed for 50% of their time over that period. So now we've got what looks like a better project. And you may think that we're coming up to being close to having a workable schedule. But in fact, the schedule we've got is going to present some major problems. And as you can see here, for example, if you look at the second half of April, that the major problem is going to be that we have far too many things going on at once. And given that the bride and groom are going to be doing a lot of this work themselves, we're going to find that they're going to be over-allocated on some parts during certain periods of this project. So what I'm going to do now is to quickly go through and allocate the bride and groom to all of the tasks in the schedule that they're going to be responsible for. And you can start to see how we have a scheduling issue. So here I have allocated the bride and groom, sometimes full-time, sometimes with a proportion of their time. And in the left-hand column, you can see the little red symbol that indicates that that particular task has over-allocated resources. Now, if I look at the resource sheet, I can see that the two resources that have over-allocation problems, that means that they've got too much to do over a period of time, are the bride and the groom, which is no surprise. And how we resolve those is what we're going to look at in the next section. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this section, it's in our interest to be able to automate the resolution of over-allocation of resources. But in order to do that, it's also important to understand the context within which we're working. So for instance, which things we can delay and which things we can't, and which things we'd prefer not to delay if it can be avoided, and so on. But they're the issues that we're going to look at in the next section when we're going to look at leveling resources. So please join me for that.